So you're ready. We've got 5 minutes, your 5-minute guide to the Apostolic Succession, how it links to the Church of England, what's good about it and what's bad about it. And it starts with the line in Matthew's Gospel we find out where Jesus is talking to Peter, and Peter's made a key revelation to him. And Jesus said to him, you're the rock of my church, and you're the rock upon I build my church. And this is, if you go to St. Peter's in Rome, this is the Latin of this is all around the kind of great dome. On this rock I shall build my church. And that's the claim, especially in St. Peter's in Rome, that they're representing the true church. And in a sense, they kind of that's just the case. Peter ends up in Rome. Paul ends up in Rome. In the early centuries, it becomes clear that Rome starts having primacy over the other provinces. So when there's a theological dispute, Rome's voice is a special voice. Equally, it's a bit sketchy what happened exactly. But the claim of the Apostolic Succession is that just as Jesus passed it on to Peter, then Peter will have passed it on to someone, and that someone will have passed it on to someone else, the sense of authority and who's the headship. And eventually the next Bishop of Rome becomes a Pope, and then the popes sort of succeed in order. And, of course, anyone who's studied history will know that there's a few crazy moments of anti-popes and contested successions. But this is the consistent idea, and it just about holds. And how does it link to England? Well, one of the popes in the 6th century dispatched a man called Augustine to represent him and to preach the gospel to the English. Now, there already were Christians in England, but there's a sort of get together as they kind of coalesce around the apostolic vision of the church. So the church is connected to Rome, and through 6th, 7th, 8th centuries, the church in England is the Church of England, but within the Roman Catholic Church. And we are linked back into that apostolic succession, which goes back to Peter. Now, with the rupture there in the Reformation, when Henry VIII, to facilitate the annulment of his marriage, decides that the Pope is no longer the head of the Supreme Governor of the Church, that he can be the Supreme Governor of the Church, that is a rupture. And from the Catholic perspective, that's huge. But one thing, before we go back to the Catholic perspective, we should note that things stay the same a little bit in England. Most of the bishops just stay on being bishops. Most of the clergy just stay on being clergy. Up the road, there's, All Saints Kingston. The Vicar of All Saints Kingston is 1530. Is the same person as the Vicar of All Saints Kingston in 1535. And so there is this continuity and the link. So the Church of England still claims to be part of the Apostolic Succession. Not necessarily the Catholic perspective. And when Pope Benedict tried to articulate this, I think he thought he was being very generous when he saw there were all these other churches, free churches, Baptist churches, Church of England, Methodist churches. And he said, well, these are ecclesial communities. Couldn't quite bring himself to use the word the church. Ecclesial communities. Now, for him, I think this was a kind of gracious recognition. But it didn't get received particularly like that. There was, a lot of people said, don't you ecclesial community me. I've been going to this church for the last 30 years. But he's committed, isn't he? You're committed to being the Catholic Church. Whatever the case, and I can see from the Roman Catholic perspective, the Anglicans don't count. They don't recognise my orders, for example. There is this fundamental belief that there is one church and that there should be one church. Jesus kind of intended there to be one church, and so we want to be part of that one church. And eventually, God willing, somehow we will reunite with the Roman Catholics and everyone will regather into the one church together. What can fracture that, perversely or surprisingly, is when someone just feels a sense of call to set up a church. And this happens around us. There's one called Infinity Church in Surbiton. Someone just feels, I've got to spread the word of the Lord to Surbiton. And they set up a church, and you'll see them around. They've got names of, the Rivers of Blood Church, or the Infinity Church, or the Free Church of this. That's not the Apostolic Succession way, because the Apostolic Succession belief is that there's only one church, and you need to be connected back to the one that Jesus intended. Often, there's a vitality and a truth to, say, the Baptist Church or a Presbyterian Church. And they may not carry the Apostolic Succession, but there's something fantastic about them. Equally, with that vitality, they can go wrong. And I think on balance, we want to be part of the one church. So I'm kind of glad to be part of an apostolic church. I think it's ultimately important that the kind of truer representation is that God wants us to be one church. The problem with institutions is that they can become quite klutzy and also power driven. It's all about our power. And that is the kind of besetting sin, if you like, of one of the apostolic churches, that they're kind of power-driven. If you just go to St. Peter's Church in Rome, I think you can feel it in the immensity. There's also a power grab, and it's problematic that way. But that is the idea of the Apostolic Succession, and the Church of England would still claim to be part of it, even if the Roman Catholic Church wouldn't quite accept that.